Most of the time, reality feels stable, predictable, consistent. You wake up, recognize your surroundings, trust your memories, move through the world without questioning it. There is an unspoken assumption beneath everything that what you perceive is what exists, and that what you remember is what happened. But occasionally, very quietly, this assumption begins to fracture, not with something dramatic, not with something obvious, but with something small, a detail that feels wrong, a memory that doesn't match, a moment that repeats or skips or behaves in a way it shouldn't. At first, it's easy to dismiss a mistake, a lapse in attention, but then you realize something unsettling. You're not the only one. Large groups of people remembering things that never existed. Individuals experiencing moments that seem to defy continuity itself, and the question begins to form, not loudly, but persistently. What happens when reality doesn't behave the way we expect it to? And more importantly, how do humans respond when the world no longer feels reliable? It begins with something simple, a name, a line from a movie, a childhood memory, something familiar enough that you don't question it until someone tells you it's wrong. Not slightly inaccurate, not misremembered in a minor way, but entirely incorrect. The term Mandela Effect was introduced in the late 2000s after large numbers of people shared the same memory that Nelson Mandela had died in prison during the 1980s, a memory that felt vivid, detailed, convincing, except it never happened. He was released in 1990 and lived until 2013. At first, it seemed like a simple mistake, a confusion of timelines, but then more examples began to appear, and then more. People recalling identical details that didn't exist, spelling variations, alternate logos, lines from films that were never spoken, and what made it difficult to dismiss was the consistency, not random errors, but shared ones. Groups of people remembering the same incorrect version of reality. One interpretation suggests this is simply how memory works. Memory is not a recording, it is reconstruction. Each time you recall something, you are not retrieving it, you are rebuilding it. Influenced by expectation, context, and suggestion, details shift, edges blur, gaps are filled. And over time, the reconstructed version can feel more real than the original. Another possibility is more social. Memories don't exist in isolation. They spread through conversation, through media, through repetition. If enough people repeat the same version, it begins to feel true. Not because it is accurate, but because it is familiar. And familiarity is often mistaken for truth. But what makes this difficult to resolve is the emotional certainty. People don't just think they remember, they feel it with confidence, with clarity, with the same conviction they would trust any real memory. Which raises a deeper question. If memory can feel real without being real, then what exactly are we trusting when we trust ourselves? There are patterns in these shared memories. They are rarely random. They tend to follow structure, simpler spellings, more familiar phrasing, more expected outcomes. It's as if the mind prefers coherence over accuracy, and when reality doesn't align with expectation, it quietly adjusts. But not everyone experiences these mismatches. Some people remember the correct version, others don't, which creates a strange division. Two groups looking at the same fact and experiencing it differently. This is where the discomfort begins, because disagreement is no longer about opinion. it's about reality itself. And when reality becomes unstable, humans do something very specific. They search for certainty. Some turn to logic, some turn to consensus, some turn to explanation, and some entertain possibilities that go far beyond conventional thinking. Parallel realities, timeline shifts, simulation errors, not necessarily because they are proven, but because they restore a sense of order, because uncertainty is harder to tolerate than unlikely explanations. While the Mandela Effect exists in shared memory, another type of experience emerges on a more personal level. Quiet, isolated, often unprovable, people describe moments where reality itself seems to behave incorrectly, a conversation that repeats word for word, an object that disappears and reappears in the same place, a person seen twice in two different locations within seconds. A moment that feels out of sequence. These experiences are often described as glitches, not dramatic enough to be undeniable, but strange enough to resist easy explanation. They are shared in online communities, thousands of accounts, some detailed, some vague, but consistent in one way. The person experiencing it feels certain that something wasn't right. One explanation points to perception itself. The brain does not process reality in real time. There is a delay, milliseconds, where sensory input is interpreted, organized, and presented as a continuous experience. During this process, information can be misaligned. Events can be reordered. Details can be altered, not because reality changed, but because perception did. Another possibility involves attention. We do not perceive everything. We filter, constantly, focusing on what matters, ignoring what doesn't. But this filtering is not perfect. Sometimes details are missed and later reconstructed incorrectly, creating the illusion that something has changed. But again, what makes this difficult to resolve is the feeling, the certainty, the quiet insistence that the experience was real. When reality appears to break, humans rarely respond with indifference. There is a pattern. First, doubt, a moment of hesitation, then verification, checking, replaying, trying to confirm what just happened. If confirmation fails, the response diverges. Some people rationalize. They find the simplest explanation, a mistake, a distraction, a lapse. Others remain uncertain. They don't fully accept a logical explanation, but they don't reject it either. They carry the experience unresolved. And then there are those who reinterpret the event entirely, not as an error, but as evidence of something deeper, something hidden, something beyond current understanding. Not because it is proof, but because it feels consistent with what they experienced. And underlying all of this is a fundamental discomfort, because reality is not just external, it is internal. It is how we orient ourselves, how we make decisions, how we trust our environment. And when that foundation shifts, even slightly, the response is not just curiosity, it is existential. There is an assumption that reality is fixed, stable, independent of perception, but human experience suggests something more complex. We do not interact with reality directly. We interact with a version of it, filtered, processed, interpreted. What we call reality may not be the world as it is, but the world as we are able to perceive it, which means when something feels wrong, it may not be reality that changed, but the interface through which we experience it. And if that interface is imperfect, then certainty becomes fragile, not completely unreliable, but not absolute either, which leads to a quiet, unresolved thought. How much of what we trust is actually true, and how much only feels that way. Most of the time, nothing breaks, reality behaves, memories align, moments flow in order, and the system holds. But occasionally, something slips, a detail doesn't match, a moment feels out of place, a memory refuses to align with fact, and in those moments, the response is not just confusion, it is reflection. A brief awareness that what we experience may not be as stable as it seems, not completely unreliable, but not perfectly fixed either. And perhaps that uncertainty is not a flaw, but a feature, a reminder that reality, as we know it, is not something we observe. It is something we construct, quietly, continuously, and sometimes imperfectly. So what do you think? If you enjoy exploring mysteries like this, consider subscribing for more.